Today we're going to be going over 10 points that I think are crucially important, whether you're brand new to working with fiberglass or maybe have some experience in the past. And we're going to jump right into it. You want good, clean, dry material there. Now we've got a piece of finished grade birch, which is actually what we used when we were building the pattern for our 29 footer, but it's not really marine grade stuff, although you can fiberglass. Now you folks at home, if you're going to be fiberglassing over plywood, it needs to be a nice exterior grade or a marine grade. I really like marine grade fir. You can use other stuff, but treated lumber is not a good idea. Very tempting to use it, but don't do it. It's got chemicals in it. Typically, any kind of fiberglass resin is not going to stick properly. But one thing you want to do is use a little high-speed grinder. Now, I love these little DeWalt's, but I know we got some Milwaukee fans and Makita fans, and that's okay. But a 24 grit disc, something very aggressive, or a 36 grit disc, so we can put some bite or texture. Now, if you look at this, you can see there's a very fine milled finish on there. It's very smooth, and that is not what we want. We need some texture for the resin to get down in. So here we go, folks. We're going to do a little bit of surface check. That is what we're looking for. You can really see the grinder marks down in there. And you can also, you want to be sure our surface temps are optimal. Right now we've got 77 degrees, which is one of the other ingredients of doing a quality fiberglass job. Generally 70s and 80s are about perfect. You can work most resins down as low as 60 degrees, and about 90, 95 is about as hot as you're gonna want to go. Otherwise, on the low end, you may not get proper cure, and on the high end, the material is gonna cure so fast that it may run away from you and you won't be able to get it done in time. Now, I may have got ahead of myself a little bit. PPE is always a good idea. You're gonna see in the channel, which we've got over 150 DIY related videos for you folks at home. Some PPE is always helpful. I like just your standard latex gloves. If I'm gonna be grinding or sanding fiberglass, it's a good idea to double glove. This will give you a little protection from the grinders. Now, usually just a secure click, like a decent respirator, or even a little dust mask can work for sanding wood. But if you're gonna be doing something like grinding up in this boat, this is our project boat, by the way, if you've been following the channel, and we are about to get back to work on this, but we sanded and grinded the whole interior. And when we did that, you're gonna need some serious protection. So a quality Tyvek suit, something with a hood. This one's got a hood on top. And there's an item, if you haven't ever used it or seen it, it's called a spray sock. This will protect your neck, your ears, and everything in between, because when you're grinding out like a floor or a transom, you're gonna be making a lot of dust. You do not wanna be breathing it. You do not want it in your ears. You don't want it in your clothes. And a Tyvek suit, a spray sock, and then the big 3M full face respirator. You put the sock on first, and then this is gonna protect your whole face. It'll keep you safe from flying debris and dust as well. So it is important, have some good ventilation, some safety equipment, even when you're sanding the plywood. Real good idea to maybe have a big open shop with some airflow through here, which we typically do when we're just doing this for ourselves and when we're not making videos for you folks at home. So we've got a good texture on that surface. It's clean, it's dry, it's warm enough. Now, another common mistake I see with people is when they're trying to fiberglass over a corner or an edge. If you look, you can see we've got a very sharp corner on this top end. Now, for those of you that have been following the channel, you may recognize some of our little sample pieces. And anything around here that is intriguing, feel free to scroll back if you don't recognize it. Everything from these sample sheets, we applied some non-skid and built a Coosa cord panel last week. We've even got these really cool little pieces of kind of mock-up stringer sections with pipes growing through that we did those nearly a year ago, but that may go into more detail versus what we're showing you folks today. But going back to our little piece here, you'll notice that we put a nice radius, and the boat world, they call that a fillet, and soften that inside corner, but the outside corner is sharp. Fiberglass fabric doesn't like to lay over sharp corners. So you're always going to want to put a radius on an inside corner, and you're always going to want to soften the outside corner. Now my preferred tool for that is a little Bosch palm router with a radius bit. I hope you folks can see that. It's about the radius of my finger. And we're going to jump in here and we're going to put a nice soft radius on this outside corner. All right. Sometimes 2 passes are in order, but you can see how quickly that's going to put nearly a perfect radius on the outside corner. Now, what I want to do, I'm going to leave one side sharp and one side radius because we are going to be actually fiberglass in that piece and this piece, and I want to show y'all what happens kind of good, better, best as far as prep. Now, another thing that's important, this is epoxy that's down in here. Typically, we like to match like for like. So if you've got epoxy resin as your filler or your fillet, usually we're going to use epoxy resin over it. But in certain cases, if you got just a narrow band of it or a seam of it gluing it together, you can use a vinyl ester or a polyester if it's a very narrow or small gap. Now, one thing we are going to do is down in that corner, going to take some 80 grit on our little 3M sanding block or little Velcro block, and we're going to texture the surface on our epoxy fillet as well. Everything we do out here, especially with fiberglass, surface prep. It's like you folks out there that maybe you're in the construction, if you're in the construction business and you're building a house, the foundation is critical. If the foundation is off or if it's not good, everything else in the project is compromised. So a quality prep work is time well spent. I know it's not as exciting as actually applying the fiberglass, but I promise you folks that it pays dividends in the end. So we're just using this little hand block to surface or etch, but you certainly could use a more aggressive disc, or you could use the sander or grinder. But all of this stuff is just for you folks. These are all demonstration pieces that we're setting up for everybody. Again, you want it to be dust free, and you can see there we've got some good scratches and etching versus slick and shiny. Now, being that we're doing this for you folks, and if you're enjoying the content that we've been working super hard on, now's a good time to ask you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like, share, comment, and tell a friend if you're finding some benefit and enjoying what we are doing. So we've got good, clean, dry, radiused, and surfaced material. Now, a lot of times, the next step would be planning exactly what kind of materials you want to go over these pieces with. Now, if you've just, say that, for example, this piece of plywood is like a non-structural application and it's just on a deck and you're just trying to waterproof it or seal it, you may want to go with a couple pieces of, you could use maybe one layer of 1708, or you might decide to use a little bit of, let's see, I've got some CSM down there, which again, you folks that have been following the channel know what these materials are, but we're going to touch on that more as we go through this video, where you would use CSM. CSM is good for just weatherproofing or waterproofing a surface. You may do a couple layers of that. If you've got something structural that you need strength, you're going to want to use something like the 1708 with longer, stronger fibers, like in a stringer application or a transom application. You need higher strength materials. So before you even start, you're going to need to think about how much and what kind of material you're going to need. And not all fiberglass is the same. There's basically 4 different types we use in the shop. And again, I'll go over those in more detail. There's also several different resins we may use. Now, our 29 footer, when we were building it, it is built out of a polyester resin but it is an iso polyester resin. And an iso polyester is a higher grade and is going to be better than an ortho polyester. And basically, as far as strength and durability, it's not that polyester is bad, but it's not as strong as a vinyl ester laminating resin. And we source all this from Fiberglass Warehouse. These folks even have a Fish Bump TV discount code. It'll save you folks some money. And a lot of the stuff that we have here on the table today, anything to build a boat or do a major repair on your RV, you name it, chances are they're going to have some of that material for you. But the vinyl ester is a grade up. Now, if you want the ultimate as far as something that's going to really, really grab on there, and we don't use a ton of it in the shop, but it's really good for gluing and waterproofing, epoxy is probably going to be the way to go. But your polyester is going to be more readily available and less expensive. The vinyl ester is really my preferred middle ground. I love it because it's almost as strong as epoxy, but it is compatible with gel coats, which that's something a lot of people aren't aware of, is that sometimes gel coat does not bond well over epoxy. So we've already covered 3 parts of our 10-step process to a quality repair job. That's going to be safety, like your glasses and your PPE, your preparation of your surfaces to make sure you've got everything ready to go, and then planning what kind of fabrics or cloths you're going to use, and then what resin you're going to be going with. Now, one of the other things, probably let's call this the 4th one, would be to pre-cut your pieces. Now, again, keep in mind, folks, these are just sample pieces we're doing for you folks at home, and I have the luxury of having some extra parts here that we're going to be using up. But what I did is I went ahead, and let's just say this is a deck like on our 29-footer. We did 1 layer of 1708, and we did 1 layer of the CSM, which adds a nice cosmetic finish. But I think today, just for the sake of the video, we're going to be going with 2 layers of the 1708. So there again, we went ahead and pre-cut our parts. Now, sometimes I've found like we have a big job planned and you're got a lot of parts cut. I love to use a little Sharpie, and sometimes I will just in a very discreet way, I might put a 1 and a 2, and maybe the orientation of it, like say for example, I may do a little teeny arrow, and then I may do a matching arrow on the actual part. And so that way you don't get confused, because sometimes when you're over at your cutting table and you're cutting these pieces out and you're like, man, does it go this way or does it go that way? And you've got your resin activated, you do not want to be confused about what you're doing. So we've got our parts cut out for that one, and we're just doing 1 layer over this one, kind of as if we were capping a little stringer. And I want to show y'all the difference between the hard corner and the soft corner. So that is important, and I like to do what I call a dry fit for all my fabrics. So a lot of times we will lay them up in the boat and make sure they lay exactly like we want, and then we will pull them back out. Typically we apply resin underneath and then apply the piece back on. Then the next step I would call, so the measuring all your pieces would be like 4. The 5th step would be going ahead, and we've decided for this particular job, an iso polyester is just fine for demonstration purposes, and it can be quite fine for your projects at home that you don't want to spend quite as much money, and maybe a little less durability is okay. But we want to go ahead and measure everything out very accurately based on the job. Now we've got about 16 ounces, or I would say that's about 475 milliliters for you folks watching overseas, which I'd like to welcome everybody. We got a lot of viewers from Australia these days, the UK, Europe in general, the Philippines. Just want to welcome everybody. What an amazing community you folks are. If you're enjoying the video, again, give me a thumbs up, and I'd love to hear where y'all are watching from. I don't know why I like it so much, but the odder the location, the more interesting that is to me. So feel free to comment, because I love to see that from our international viewers. So we've got our resin poured up, and we've got something that is a real time saver. Now, I like this. This is a brand new one. We have these little squeeze bottles that allow us to squeeze out the proper amount of MEKP. Now this, you'll notice, has some dye in it. We have a lot of people ask questions about that. Sometimes if you find the right source You can find some red dye. Helps you see a little bit better when you're thoroughly mixed, but you don't have to have it. So today I'm going to use just some regular clear MEKP, which we buy it in the big gallon jugs. Most of the time when you order from these nice folks like Fiberglass Warehouse, you're going to get it in a 2-ounce container, which is, it's the same stuff. So that, don't let that bother you. Now, mixing accurately is very important. So I've got our little cheat sheet that we use here on the channel, 16 ounces, which is what we got. Our range from 1 to 2% would be 5 to 10 cc's. Now that is very important, and part of step number 5 is being accurate with your catalyst ratios. So measure out the amount you need, which I may jump back a little bit. We did a video not too long ago where we made sample pieces of everything from the CSM to the biaxial, and we measured exactly how many ounces of resin it took per square foot. So that'll help you folks at home calculate. If you got a big floor area, you figure the square feet, and then you can extrapolate that information based on this video. So feel free to jump back in the channel and check that out. But generally speaking, all of your polyesters and your vinyl esters are going to operate between 1 and 2% on your MEKP activator. If it's really, really cool or cold, you would run toward the maximum. If it's very, very hot in the summertime, you would run at the minimum. And we do that by volume. So just remember, you folks, especially on the metric system, may be a little bit easier for you folks. Now, many times, like your epoxy systems are going to be on a pump system. They're like a calibrated pump, and this is a 2-to-1 mix ratio on the resin, the epoxy resin we got from Total Boat. And generally it's going to be 1 pump of the resin and 1 pump of the activator. And it's important to remember, like in the summertime, you would use a slow hardener because it would give you more working time. And then like in the wintertime right now, or in really cold weather, you might want to use a fast. And then they even make a medium. But it is very important to be accurate on your ratios with epoxy. Vinyl esters and polyesters, you have a little bit of wiggle room. Epoxy needs to be dead on, or else it may not cure properly. So just remember that. That is crucial. So based on what we got here, 16 ounces, we're going to go on the spicy side. We're going to go nearly at the 2% mark. And you can see I've taken my little Sharpie and it's made it easier for me to see right there. That'll work. MEKP, if you're not familiar with it, folks, is highly corrosive. You want eye protection, you want gloves, you want some good ventilation. We've got a big open shop here. I've been doing this my entire life. My father was a professional boat builder. My older brother Mark is a professional boat builder and was a commercial fisherman. And then I've grown up in this boat shop. So if I haven't introduced myself, folks of you that have been following know who I am, but my name is Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop. And like I said, I'm a 2nd generation professional boat builder and a 100-ton licensed captain. So we've had a lot of experience doing this kind of stuff. Now, a really, really good thorough mix is very important, folks. And I always like to mix in a little cup. I like these little wooden paddles. Oftentimes, your resin suppliers will give these away by the handful if you're buying some materials from them. And I like to rotate left, rotate right. Sometimes we kind of stir up from the bottom, turn it back around. Usually about 1 minute or so at minimum of mixing time, or about 100 movements. Generally tell people mix till you know it's done, and then mix just a little bit more. Because if it's not mixed properly, you will have uncured resin in your fiberglass, and that is a bad thing. That is no bueno. So one of the things that people run into a lot of times is they will try to work out of a cup like this and maybe just use a brush, and it can take a very long time to dab a little bit and dab a little bit and dab a little bit. I'm not a fan of leaving it in the cup, and I'm not a fan of just using a brush. Typically what we will do is once it's thoroughly mixed, we're going to transfer this to a pan. And what that's going to do is that is going to give you a little more working time, because the resin has good airflow over it, and it will help it keep cool. Because a lot of people don't realize this. This is probably another one of the big things people run into. is they mix up too much resin and they get a runaway, it's called an exothermic reaction. So you don't want to mix up any more than you can use in each little individual batch. And the less experience you have, the smaller batches I would start with, folks. Don't start by mixing a 5-gallon pail. Can almost guarantee you that it's going to go off in a hurry, and it can be a violent reaction sometimes. So just remember that large quantities and large masses are going to generate heat. So I always like to transfer over to a pan. Now I'm a big fan of a little roller, and we like to wrap it in tape, and that'll help get rid of some of the, maybe y'all can see the fibers that come off of there. It's one of those little tricks I show in every one of our videos, but it definitely helps you produce a higher quality repair job. Now we are going to be using a brush a little bit, but a roller is going to get the material on a lot faster, and it's going to be a more uniform distribution. So I don't see any reason to use a brush except for dabbing little hairs and sometimes mixing the resin. Now one thing I do like to do though is make sure there are no loose bristles before we start our job. So we have got our resin mixed. I like to keep a trash can handy too. Anytime we're working, have everything you need close by. So we've got our wood here. Now whether we're working with wood or you folks may have seen on the channel, we work with a lot of Coosa board and some other composites, Divinycell sometimes, but Coosa board is one of our favorites. I think one of the most important things to a quality repair job is, and I see people try to do this, they try to put the glass down first and then they try to just wet through it. That is not going to give you a quality job. And again, this may be one of the most important steps. Now today, for the sake of time, we're going to be kind of running through this pretty rapidly, but I've got another video that is, I think it's our most popular video on the channel, how to fiberglass over plywood. And it's actually that sample piece right over there that we wrapped it in fiberglass. Plywood is porous, and a lot of times it'll soak resin as you apply it. I am a huge fan, if time allows and you can do it, to prime this with some resin. And it's okay to give it plenty of time to even cure or completely tack off before you come back with your following layers of glass. Now today, for the sake of time, we're not going to allow this to tack off and then follow it, but it is very important to put plenty of resin down on your plywood first, well before you put your pieces of fabric down, or else you will end up with a poor bond and a failure with your fiberglass. And if there's one thing you get out of this, prime your surfaces before you apply your glass. Now, another thing to remember is your CSM or the chop strand mat, which your biaxial comes with a long strand material and the random fibers. This side should always go down toward the surface that you are applying the glass to. You would never want to apply it upside down. This is much better at bonding to irregular surfaces, and the CSM holds more resin, which helps give you a better bond. This is for the strength, this is for the bonding. Always CSM side down. Now y'all hang in there with me. I'm going to try really hard to roll through this as quick as I can. And again, we're about halfway through, but don't leave me yet, because I promise there's some other steps that are crucially important. And again, if you miss one, it could cause a failure to your whole job, and you may be wondering what in the world happened. Now, you'll notice that that went semi-transparent, but there's still some whiteness there. We're going to give that a moment to soak, and then I'm going to go ahead and jump right here and get a little bit of primer on our other sample piece. Now, the end grain, again, can be very thirsty when it comes to soaking up resin. And if you're at home and you have the time, even like, say, for example, if you build some stringers or your transom and you have some really nice, pretty, warm weather and it's low humidity, then you don't think you can get all your fiberglass work done, I would go ahead and prime it or seal it, and then it'll be okay till the following weekend, and you can come back and just pick right back up where you left. So we've got that soaking. Now I've got another little tool here that we use all the time on the channel. We call that a fin roller or a bubble buster. And that is gonna make a big difference in getting air out of there and moving around the resin so that you got a proper resin to glass ratio. You can actually even see it kind of pushing the bubbles, moving the resin. Now the trick is you don't want to push too hard or you will squeeze out all the resin, and it's better to have it a little resin rich than resin starved. So don't feel like you got to get every little teeny tiny bubble out of this fabric. But you can see right now it's gone mostly transparent and you can actually see the grain. I usually like to go one direction, and the pressure is relatively light, folks. We're not using a ton of pressure. And this is one of the tools that separates the pros from the beginners, is this little bubble buster. Now, most of the ones that we are finding online are aluminum and they can totally work. I kind of prefer the nylon ones, the plastic ones, if you can find them. And we're working right now to find a source for those on our Amazon. Now, remember how we put the little marks? We can see the orientation and we got the numbering on here so we know where it goes. All right, a little more resin on this one. And then we'll let it sit for a few moments and let it just kind of soak in, marinate a little bit. You can't really rush it too much. You kind of have to get the material on there, and sometimes the resin just needs a few moments. Now, what that will allow us to do though is jump over to our other piece, and I'm going to hit this with just a little more resin. Because again, remember your foundation, folks. Wood is very porous. And if you want to see more about fiberglassing over a beam like this, remember to scroll back through the channel about a year ago or so. We've actually done 3 different videos similar to this one, but one was with epoxy, and one was with vinyl ester, and one was with polyester. Because everybody seems to kind of have their preferences. Now I want to show, hopefully this reacts the way I expect it to, and I'll show the difference between a nice radius corner and then what happens with the sharp corner. All right, so we are going to give this a few minutes to soak. All right, folks, come in here and check out. We got this second layer of our biaxial going down. And again, you can see the magic that this little fin roller is doing here. Now, we're just putting 2 layers of the 1708 down, which kind of brings me to, I believe we're at about 0.8 or 9, and I've probably given y'all more than that, but it would be like planning how many layers of glass. Now, I do also even have a video, we did this a couple weeks ago where we showed like 1, 2, 3, and 4 layers of the 1708, or 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of the 18-ounce woven roven and CSM to show you how much thickness. But you can't add too much fiberglass at once, or else it's going to generate a lot of heat, kind of like what we talked about in some of our earlier steps about mixing in smaller batches and making sure it stays cool. If you stack too much fiberglass at one time, you're going to get some heat and runaway temperature, and that's not good. So usually 2 or 3 layers at a time is about all you can do in most cases. And remember, with temperature, the cooler it is, typically the more material you can apply. And folks, that is about what properly wet out fiberglass should look like. You don't want resin puddled on top, but you don't want to see a bunch of dry fibers. And don't expect it to be perfectly bubble free. There's still probably going to be some little bubbles in there. Now, while we're working on this, I wanted to show you folks the CSM. We use this a lot. It's not as strong as the 1708 or the woven roven, but you can tear the edges for like a nice cosmetic finish. And like if you have 2 smaller pieces, you can actually feather or tear the edges and even kind of blend it together. And the CSM also works really good going over odd shapes. Now, one thing to remember here in the US, our CSM typically only works well with vinyl ester and polyester resins. Now, you folks overseas, our viewers from Australia and the UK, if you request from your supplier a CSM with a powder binder, it can work just fine with epoxy. But basically epoxy doesn't have the same solvents that polyester and vinyl ester does, and it won't melt or dissolve the CSM. CSM's kind of unique. Once it gets wet with some fabric, it gets where it will tear and kind of melt and conform real easy. And that's a good thing sometimes. Now, I did want to show you folks how nice, and you can kind of see side by side the difference. Sometimes you don't want that geometric pattern. You want kind of a more uniform pattern. I also like the CSM. Say, for example, if you know you got to do some sanding and grinding on your surface, you can use the CSM kind of as a sacrificial layer, if you will, and you're not getting into your structural glass. You're kind of just getting into more of the cosmetic glass. Now, I know I'm moving around a bunch. There's a lot of information. I'm really trying to do one video that condenses as much as possible. So just remember, folks, this is the CSM. I like the 1 ounce, and that would be in weight. That's 1 ounce per square foot. Now, I don't know why they do it, but when they measure out our woven and biaxial, they measure it by the square yard. And 1708 with the CSM is one of my favorite fabrics all around. The woven is kind of more of an old school. Now, something very important to remember is you never would want to stack layers of woven one on another. You always start with a CSM, you would add a woven, you would add another CSM and another woven. These don't stick very well to themselves, but it's very strong. One other fabric that we do use occasionally that works very well with epoxy is a very lightweight finishing cloth. That is a 6 ounce cloth, and it lays down and conforms very nice. Great for you kayak builders or canoe builders, or just want a little wooden boat that you want a very thin veil. Now, lots of interest. If you want a better cosmetic finish on your CSM here, you can actually use what we call peel ply. And again, you folks have probably seen me use a little bit of the peel ply on the channel before if you've been following us. And what this will do is it will smooth out the surface, and it will also leave a surface that's perfect for fiberglassing. Say, for example, you want to smooth out the surface and you can't come back and work on your project, say, for another week or so. You can leave the peel ply on, and then when you come back, all you would do is peel it off, and you're going to get a much smoother surface, and it's going to be ready to work immediately. You don't really have to sand underneath it. Now, regrettably, in this video, it's not long enough for me to show you folks what that's going to look like. But again, I got a video, if you jump back a few in the channel, I've got a video showing application of peel ply and what it's going to look like. Now, this is what I wanted to show you folks. Now, you can see in this nice downward radius there, the glass is conforming. But if you look on the sharp corner, I hope the camera will pick that up. Do y'all see that there is a bubble continuing to form left and right? It's kind of like if you try to dab it down on the corner, on the inside corner, it redevelops on the top corner. If you tap it down on the top corner, even if you try to stretch the fabric down with the brush and pull it, you're going to continue to get this bubble. Versus, look at how pretty and nice with that slight radius, you get this beautiful transition. There you go. You get that really nice transition around that corner. So remember, no sharp corners, not too many layers. Plan out your work. Even with this peel ply, that's kind of leading us into the next phase of things, which that can kind of get into your gel coat work and your finishing work. So usually before gel coat application, like say this peel ply, for example, when you peel it up and peel it off, it's going to leave a really nice finish that you could go right over it with gel coat if you wanted to. But you may need to do some sanding and grinding. Now, remember that your laminating resins, which is what we typically use, you'll notice this says vinyl ester laminating. Even though this says tooling, this is a laminating resin as well, which means it's going to stay tacky and receptive for following layers, and that could even include gel coat. But a lot of people that are new to fiberglass think it's going to be it's going to stay super wet, or you got to put wax in every coat, or the resin and the fiberglass just won't cure it all. And that's not really the case. It's just the very tiniest bit on the very top remains tacky and chemically active so that following layers can bond or attach. So just remember, if you're going to be sanding, use some peel ply or use a layer of some CSM. You can sand it with like our little high-speed grinder, and even resin that doesn't have wax, like laminating resin, if you use an aggressive grit like the 36 grit with one of these little high-speed DeWalt grinders, and again, I'll put a link for all of these tools. That's the DWE 4011. I will be sure to put a link, and it's amazing how effective these little grinders are at knocking the surface off. And then a lot of times we'll come back like with some 80 grit like we did on our little sanding block here, and maybe even some 120, and that'll take you to the point of being ready for some gel coat, which probably, I'm going to say this is probably the last point we're going to cover, and then you folks can even again jump back and look at some of our other videos where we spray gel coat, roll it, brush it, and get an idea there. But it's important to remember that most of the time when we're putting layers of gel coat down, we use, like on the first layer, second layer, even if you're doing a third layer, without wax. Again, this is from the folks at Fiberglass Warehouse. Don't know if I mentioned this in a video or not, but important to always mix or agitate all your materials before you use them. Now, they do make a product called Surface Seal. Sometimes it's called Modifier C or Wax Solution. And basically, this is like a paraffin wax dissolved in a styrene. Matter of fact, you can even see some of the wax there on the edge. It's a semi-clear, kind of what it looks like. It's kind of an opaque or semi-clear. And you can probably even see the little particles of wax in there. What we typically do is if you need to make a finishing resin, or if you want your last coat of gel coat to be non-tacky and dry hard and smooth, you would add 2, 3, 4, sometimes even not 5 would be pushing it, but probably 2 or 3%, pretty similar to what we do on the very high end of our catalyst ratios. And you mix that in very thoroughly with your resin or your gel coat on the very last coat, and that'll give it a slick, hard finish. But it's not good for any other materials to go over, because that wax is going to repel anything that might want to bond to the surface of your resin or your gel coat. So my preferred method is to buy gel coat without wax, and then buy some Surface Seal or a Modifier C or Wax Solution. Now, another thing that you can do, folks, if you want your gel coat to be slicker and shinier and a prettier finish, you can use some of the Orca composites, the air dry coatings. This looks a lot like, it's like a clear additive. It looks a lot like, there's a product online called Duratec that's popular. It's been around for a long time, but I like the Orca, the air dry. And you can mix it up to 50-50 with your gel coat, and it flows much more like paint, and you don't have to add a wax additive if you don't want to. So, that was a lot of information. I hope we covered everything y'all were hoping to see. I think we touched on radiusing, surface prep. Now remember, a lot of the surface prep applies even to Coosa board or diab, if you're using a Corcel. Very, very similar. Folks out there, if you want to get in touch with me, we do offer Patreon now as a way, if you got direct questions, you want to talk to me on the phone, and you regular Patreon viewers out there, our members, our Patreon members, I genuinely want to thank you guys for your support of the channel and enjoy talking to each and every one of you folks, our subscribers internationally. If you're enjoying this content, or if you want to be a Patreon member, be sure to comment down below. We'll give you that information. It's Captain Joe here with Island Marine Charters, Fish Bump TV. My son Logan is my amazing cameraman working hard behind the scenes, and we will catch you folks in the next episode.